The Galactic Council had warned humanity about the Void Hunters. They were an ancient species that had conquered over 2,000 star systems. Their technology was beyond anything the younger races could understand. Their ships moved through space like ghosts. Their weapons could destroy planets in seconds, and their favorite method of conquest was simple. They would use their null field generators to completely shut down enemy ships. No power, no weapons, no shields, nothing. The enemy would float helplessly in space, while the Void Hunters boarded and harvested them for whatever dark purposes they had. Captain stood on the bridge of the human vessel Prometheus as alarms screamed around her. The ship had been on a simple exploration mission near the edge of known space. They were studying a strange energy signature coming from an abandoned moon. It was supposed to be safe. The Void Hunters had never been seen this far from their territory, but now 3 of their massive black ships surrounded the Prometheus. Each one was 10 times the size of the human vessel. The null field hit them without warning. Every screen went dark. Every light died. The hum of the engines that had been their constant companion for months suddenly stopped. The Prometheus became a tomb of silence floating in the endless dark of space. Chief Engineer Cole was in the engine room when the power died. He had been in the middle of adjusting the plasma flow regulators. Now he stood in complete darkness. His heart pounded in his chest. He had read the reports about what the Void Hunters did to their prisoners. Nobody ever came back. Nobody ever escaped. Every species that had faced the null field had simply accepted their fate and died. But was human, and humans did not accept fate quietly. He pulled out a small flashlight from his pocket. It was an old chemical-based light. No electronics, just simple chemistry that humans had used for centuries before they even dreamed of touching the stars. The beam cut through the darkness, smiled. The Void Hunters had shut down all electronic systems, but they had forgotten one important thing about humans. They had invented thousands of ways to survive before electricity ever existed. On the bridge, Captain was already thinking. Emergency oxygen had kicked in automatically. It was a purely mechanical system that required no power. The Prometheus had been designed with multiple backup systems that used no electronics at all. This was standard for all human ships. Other species found it strange. Why build primitive systems when you had advanced technology? But humans remembered their history. They remembered that technology could fail, and they planned for the worst. Pulled open a panel beneath her command chair. Inside was a hand-cranked communication system. It used simple radio waves powered by physical motion. She began turning the handle. A small light flickered to life. Within minutes, she had connected to engineering through hardwired cables that ran through the ship like veins. Answered on the other end. His voice came through scratchy but clear. He told the captain what he had already figured out. The null field was blocking all electronic signals and preventing any power generation that used electromagnetic principles. But it could not stop chemical reactions. It could not stop mechanical force. It could not stop the basic laws of physics that humans had learned to use long before they discovered electricity. The Void Hunters were scanning the Prometheus. They detected no power, no life signs on their instruments. They assumed the humans were already dying in the cold darkness. They began slowly moving their ships into boarding position. They had done this 10,000 times before. Every species reacted the same way. Panic, despair, surrender. The Void Hunters saw no reason to hurry. The humans were already dead. They just did not know it yet. Inside the Prometheus, the crew was working in organized silence. They moved through the dark corridors using chemical lights and hand signals. Every human aboard knew exactly what to do. They had trained for total system failure. Other species had laughed at these drills. Why prepare for something so impossible? But humans knew that impossible things happened all the time. Gathered his engineering team around the main reactor. The reactor itself was dead. The null field had killed it completely. But next to the reactor was something that no alien species had ever seen on a starship. It was a small chamber filled with water and strange metals. It was a nuclear thermal device that used simple radioactive decay to generate heat. No electronics required, just physics. The team began working with hand tools. They connected the thermal device to a series of mechanical pumps. The pumps pushed water through pipes. The water turned to steam. The steam began turning turbines. Within an hour, they had generated enough raw mechanical power to start Phase 2. Captain received the signal from engineering. 3 knocks on the pipes. The old communication method that sailors had used on Earth for centuries. She smiled in the darkness. The Void Hunters had advanced technology that could shut down anything electronic, but they had never faced a species that remembered how to survive without it. The science officer, Dr. Sarah, was in her laboratory working by candlelight, actual candles made from organic compounds. She was looking at the data they had collected from the strange moon before the attack. The energy signature had been unusual. It had seemed almost alive. Now she understood what it was. The moon was not just any rock. It was a fragment of a null field generator, an ancient one that had been damaged and abandoned long ago. The Void Hunters had probably come here to retrieve it. Sarah realized something important. The null field worked by creating a bubble of altered space where electromagnetic forces were suppressed, but the field itself had to be generated by something, and that something was vulnerable to physical force. The Void Hunter ships were not protected by their own field. They had to stay outside its edge to maintain their electronic systems. She sent this information to the captain through a messenger running through the dark corridors, read the note by flashlight. Her eyes widened. She saw the opportunity. The Void Hunters had never fought an enemy that could still move without power. They had positioned their ships close to the edge of the null field. Too close. In the cargo bay, weapons officer James Torres was leading a team of engineers and soldiers. They were building something impossible. The Prometheus carried standard rail guns that used electromagnetic acceleration to fire projectiles. These were useless now, but the ship also carried a very old backup system, a chemical propulsion launcher that used explosive compounds to fire heavy shells. It had been installed as a historical curiosity, a reminder of human origins. Nobody had ever expected to actually use it. The team removed the launcher from its display case. They mounted it on a makeshift platform near the cargo bay doors. They loaded it with the heaviest shells they could find, mining charges meant for breaking apart asteroids. Each one weighed over 500 kilograms. Each one was packed with enough explosive material to crack a small moon. Meanwhile, had achieved something incredible in engineering. Using only mechanical systems and the thermal generator, he had managed to restore partial control of the ship's maneuvering thrusters. These thrusters used simple compressed gas stored in physical tanks. No electronics required. The Prometheus could move again. Not fast, not far, but enough. The Void Hunters detected the movement too late. They had become complacent. No species had ever regained mobility under a null field. They watched in confusion as the small human ship slowly rotated in space. The cargo bay doors opened. They saw something emerge, something primitive and strange, a weapon that used fire and smoke to propel projectiles. Such technology had not been used in galactic warfare for over 1,000,000 years. The first shell struck the lead Void Hunter ship directly on its hull. The ancient explosive compound detonated with fury. The explosion tore through the alien vessel with devastating force. The Void Hunters had shields that could deflect energy weapons and advance projectiles, but they had nothing that could stop a simple kinetic impact followed by chemical explosion. Their shields were designed for a different kind of war. The second shell destroyed the null field generator on the lead ship. Instantly, a portion of the field collapsed. Power flickered back to life on one side of the Prometheus. The humans had a window, redirected every bit of restored power to the main weapons array. Captain gave the order. The rail guns fired through the gap in the field. Superheated projectiles moving at a fraction of light speed tore into the second Void Hunter ship. The aliens screamed on all frequencies. They called for retreat. They could not understand what was happening. This was not how conquest worked. The prey was supposed to die quietly. The third shell from the chemical launcher hit the final Void Hunter ship. The explosion was massive. The ship broke apart in a shower of debris. The remaining null field generators failed. Full power returned to the Prometheus. Every system came back online at once. The surviving Void Hunters tried to escape. Their damaged ships limped toward open space. But the Prometheus was no longer a victim. The humans had turned their dead ship into something else entirely. They had transformed it into a weapon that combined ancient simplicity with modern devastation. Captain pursued the fleeing enemy. She had no intention of letting them report what had happened here. The Void Hunters could not be allowed to learn from this defeat. The rail guns fired again and again. The chemical launcher added its thunder to the assault. Within an hour, nothing remained of the Void Hunter fleet but scattered wreckage. The crew of the Prometheus gathered on the restored bridge. They were exhausted and covered in grease and soot. They had fought with tools from their ancestors and won against an enemy that had conquered thousands of worlds. Doctor had recovered data from the destroyed ships. The Void Hunters had extensive files on every species they had faced. Every single one had simply surrendered when the null field activated. Humans were the first to fight back. Humans were the first to win. Captain recorded her report for the Galactic Council. She explained what had happened and how they had survived. She knew that this information would change everything. The Void Hunters were no longer invincible. Their greatest weapon had a weakness. It could only stop advanced technology. It could not stop human stubbornness. It could not stop human creativity. It could not stop the fundamental truth that humans had survived on a hostile planet for millions of years before they ever discovered electricity. The message spread across the galaxy faster than any ship could travel. Species that had hidden in terror from the Void Hunters began to hope again. They asked humanity for help. They wanted to learn the old ways. They wanted to build backup systems that used no electronics. They wanted to understand how to survive when everything else failed. Humanity answered their call. Engineers traveled to distant worlds teaching ancient skills: blacksmithing, mechanical engineering, chemical propulsion. Things that had been forgotten by most species for millions of years. The galaxy began to change. The Void Hunters found their conquests becoming more difficult. Their null fields were still powerful, but now their prey could fight back. Captain became a legend, the woman who had turned a dead ship into a god-level weapon, but she always corrected people when they called her a hero. She said that the true heroes were the ancestors who had invented fire and wheels and sails and engines. Humans had never stopped building on the old foundations. They had carried their primitive survival skills to the stars, and when the darkness came, they had remembered how to make light. The Prometheus continued its mission exploring the unknown, but now it carried a new reputation. Every species knew the story. The little human ship that had been shut down by the most feared weapon in the galaxy. The ship that had refused to die. The ship that had fought back with fire and smoke and determination. The ship that had proven once and for all that humanity was not like other species. They did not just use technology. They understood it from its most basic principles to its most advanced applications. They could go backward as easily as forward. And that made them the most dangerous species the galaxy had ever known, not because of their weapons, not because of their ships, but because they would never ever surrender. They would always find another way to fight, even in the darkness, even when everything else had failed. Humans would always find the light.